coming to Ukraine since 1999, but I still haven't learned Ukrainian properly. So I do apologize, but I will speak English. But may I just ask you, how many of you actually understand English? Give me some hands up. Okay, it seems to me that that we will understand each other very well. It's a great honor to be here today, and we will focus on one issue which I think is quite important these days, which is the impact of new media, social media on elections. I think that probably most of you are even more familiar with the social media than myself, for example. How many of you use Facebook and Twitter? Everyone uses, including Twitter? No? Facebook more, yeah? Okay. And so this is what we would like to discuss today. And so it's my great privilege to introduce Beata, who is a very good friend, colleague, someone who has very big experience with elections. You know, she's been working in different positions in many countries. But she's also, I mean, she currently resides in America, and I think it would be very interesting also to hear from her about the last US elections, where we certainly saw some interesting new trends. Particularly, what I mean is the emergence of this fake news, you know, which certainly played some role in these elections. So with further ado, Beata, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Dobrого dnia. And very happy to be here. And I thank very much the organizers to be able to address you at Taras Shevchenko University. I think it's a very important aspect that we're here to discuss. And it's both a pleasure as well as an honor for me to be back in one of my favorite cities in the world and to be able to talk to you about this important subject. I also want to thank my friend and colleague, Rasto Kuzal, and he's been a firm proponent of media freedom in democratizing countries for more than 2 decades. His organization, Memo 98, was at the forefront of transformations in his own country, which is Slovakia. And I've had the pleasure of working with him on various election missions over the years, from Sarajevo to Kyiv and many places in between. For me, media is a key component of a viable democracy. And it is essential to citizens that they be able to make an informed choice of who will represent them in government and who will make policy decisions on their behalf. Yet the media landscape today has changed radically from that of the 1990s, when Central and Eastern European countries were first facing these democratic challenges, and even more so from when the first modern democracies were being constituted in the United States, in Poland, in France, more than 200 years ago. So getting a little bit into the historical aspect, when the founding fathers in the United States were arguing the finer points of democratic structuring in the late 1700s, the main source of information was really the leaflet or the pamphlet, little pieces of paper like you have on your desks. And they were accessible to only a limited subset of the population at the time, generally men who owned property and who could read. But these leaflets or pamphlets would put forward the pros and cons of various options both in how a state should be constituted, as well as how its representatives should be elected. And these arguments, even then, more than 200 years ago, were put forward with a great amount of sophistication and detail. And I think any of you that may have read the Federalist Papers may agree that they remain some of the most important documents in terms of practical democratic thinking. And these were read widely by those who at the time were making decisions in terms of how the United States government would function. But they were also informed by the political discourse of their time, taking into account thinkers as far back as the ancient Greeks and especially the ancient Romans. And this discussion continues in academic scenarios even today at your university, at universities around the world. The advent of broadcast media, first radio and then television, brought information to a wider swathe of the population, which has been more inclusively involved in the democratic process since the early 1900s. And so now suddenly people who may not have had a traditional education, may not even be able to read or write, were able to gain information through the radio or later through television and be able to start analyzing and making judgments themselves. But even then, the physical limitations of frequency and bandwidth meant that the proliferation of media was still rather limited, and it was quite heavily influenced by the state, especially in countries that had more socially oriented policies. In countries like the United Kingdom, broadcast media was seen to have an educative role. And this was really spearheaded, for instance, by the British Broadcast Corporation, or the BBC as you know it, which rather tightly delimited what information was presented to the British public, but also how it was presented. So the format as well as the content were very importantly shaped. Similarly, in the United States, as well as in other Western countries, broadcast regulators ensured that most citizens were receiving their information from a discrete set of sources, from a limited set of sources. And this may have been different in content and in coverage, but it was still largely consumable and comparable by different citizens seeking information. Although self-regulation was the model mostly used by both of these systems, in extreme cases, the state still retained the possibility of sanction for extreme or deliberately misleading information from being broadcast. However, with the proliferation of new and social media in the late 1990s and in the early 2000s, this media landscape has shifted dramatically. And today, citizens can receive, but also retransmit information in real time, across country borders. They can consume what they want, they can discard what they don't want, and all with very limited text or soundbite information, which is really tailored for a modern audience. This has made the information we receive today both incredibly extensive, but also incredibly shallow and superficial. Today's media consumer rarely reads beyond the headlines, is easily led by the computer predictor systems towards information that reinforces existing beliefs and opinions. And they tend to engage with analytical and investigative reporting more rarely than ever. In reverse, the new media sphere caters to this soundbite information space in a competition both for advertising, who seeks to make money, reifying this process even further. There is a lot of talk of late about media bubbles, in which individuals self-select the articles that reinforce their own particular worldview, without often encountering information which may be contrary or which may test the notions that they hold. At the same time, the obligation and the ability of the state to involve itself in this new media sphere has declined considerably. While some countries have engaged in censorship in pretty much a futile effort to stem the flow of information, in other states, self-regulation is being explored as a viable option for trying to shape this new media space in a way that can encourage this sector liberalizing potential while limiting its destructive elements. But I also wanted to focus today on the onus on the citizen to wade through this new media environment. And in many ways, this role of the citizen has not changed considerably since the 1700s, when democracy was first tested in practice. Even back then, pamphlets and leaflets proliferated. Often they were drafted by anonymous authors, and the responsibility lay on the citizen and the consumer to read a wide range of options and topics, to consider the arguments that were being put forward, to weigh the various options, and to come to a decision on the balance of evidence that each person considered. Many propositions were flawed, many propositions were wrong, or even intentionally misleading. Yet the fundamental premise that underlie the democratic thinking was that every person has the intellect and the ability to decide for themselves, to make an informed judgment. In this sense, the modern world is very like that older system. While the mode and the platform of information provision has changed, the onus is still on the individual to not just take at face value what is being presented, to look beyond the media sources immediately available, and to reflect on one's own opinions, to test your thinking through exposure to various points of view, and to actively even seek that other point of view out. This taps into the discussion that Rasto mentioned of fake news. And this has been a discussion that's been very prominent of late. As you know, it was a huge issue in the last United States election, and quite a lot of discussion has taken place about the impact that it has had on the results. Various media, including Facebook, have taken steps to identify fake news, sometimes seeking to remove it. And this is in line with previous regulatory practices to try to limit knowingly false or incendiary information. Yet here too, citizens have a role to play. Already in many places, civil society organizations have sprung up to identify potentially false information, to check it against other news sources, and to present their findings in the public space so that people can knowingly know what they are consuming. Some broadcast media have taken similar steps to identify and to name and shame fake news. Nevertheless, the responsibility on the citizen to take what they need and what they read and to see it with a healthy degree of skepticism, cross-checking this against other information sources to see whether it stands up. It is only with this level of comparison and investigation that citizens can really decide what is true and what is fake news. This is somewhat problematic in the modern media environment, where citizens to some degree have become lazy in the way that they interface both with the traditional media but also with the new media. They have come to assume that whatever is presented to them on the television or on the computer screen must be true to some extent, otherwise it would not be allowed. But this really is a mistake in a free media environment. This type of free media environment assumes that people make their own decisions on what they consume and to what level they should trust it. A little bit like junk food, it can be enjoyable and it can be amusing in small doses, but in large amounts, it's probably not good for us, and we need to learn to identify the ingredients ourselves and decide whether or not we want to take it in. Not too long ago, I myself attended a lecture with a former US Secretary of State. And she talked about the need for a robust information environment. And here, the role of quality journalism is key. Throughout the history of media development, it is analytical and investigative journalists, trained and professional, that have helped audiences guide their way through the wheat and the chaff, who have helped differentiate and analyze the various merits of different points of view, often with evidence presented to support their case. And this is something that needs to be continued and nurtured. If citizens around the world are to stand a chance of navigating the new media space, they require credible and hard-hitting journalism to help guide them. This is indispensable, although still somewhat nascent in many countries throughout the world. But if one thing has given me heart in the course of the last half year of US political developments, it is that it has brought out the best in American journalism from credible sources like the Washington Post or like the New York Times, media sources that take their time, that gather evidence, that piece the puzzle together, and then present it in a meaningful and cohesive way for readers to understand. And you may not always agree with their point of view, but at least you are presented with the facts to base your decision on. And with this, I would like to close and to say that everyday citizens, together with credible and professional journalists, I think is the way forward through this new media space. IFES, for its part, has been working with media across various sectors in Ukraine. This has involved training journalists on key issues involving recent political finance reform, on issues such as electoral system choice, on European standards for elections, as well as very specialist issues of public funding or gender quotas. We've also tried to work with journalists not only in Kyiv, but also across the regions, in places like Lviv, Odessa, Kharkiv, Vinnytsia, Dnipro. And we included more than 90 representatives of both print and web-based media, focusing on these key aspects that I mentioned. As such, IFES has been making efforts to include this key component of media in what is our traditional mandate of technical assistance for elections. And through focus on such important elements, it is really hoped that the media sector continues to grow and to become more robust in Ukraine, developing the professionalism and the transparency that is necessary to buttress the democratic principles that the country has espoused, and to have the conditions that are necessary to incorporate new media into the fabric of a vibrant society in a way that can be constructive and contributive rather than destructive. So I hope these points have given you some interesting food for thought. Myself and Rasto are here to answer any questions that you may have. And we'd really like to engage in a dialogue with you about the issues that you think are important and of particular concern here in Ukraine, but also globally. So with that, I'll close and I open the floor to any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Beata, and the floor is yours. So don't be shy. Maybe you can share your experience with the media that you use to get information. Tell us how it is. What do you use, for example? I mean, when you are looking for some information which you're interested in, do you watch television? Do you read newspapers, or do you use social media, Facebook, or some online media platforms? Anyone? Yes, please.
Firstly, thank you very much for this meeting.
Please use the mic. Unfortunately,
Social media, but we all know that in our time, no one, especially young people, don't use the newspapers. We don't read them, but we read online newspapers, such as for me, Hromadske and Espresso. And I think that every online newspapers point their side of view, but I suppose that we all must create our own view by different online newspapers and different points of view. And also, even my parents, my mother, now she is in Facebook, and she is also create her view based on Facebook's news, not only Echo Moskvy, for example. Yes, thank you.
Excellent. What's your name?
Polina.
Alina, you speak very good English.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your points. What about other people? I mean, is it common that your parents now try to join these new trends by signing up to social media, or they mostly look at the traditional media? Anyone else wants to share views or ask any sort of questions in that respect? Don't be shy.
And can I also ask how many people have differences within their families between the information that you consume and the information that your parents consume? You know, and for instance, within my family, we often have very difficult discussions because my father follows one stream of media information I get my information from different sources, and that often leads to very conflictual discussions within our family, and whether people here have similar experiences according to the media sources that you read.
Well, I will introduce myself firstly. My name is Miroslava. I'm the political scientist, student of political science department, as you know. And you said about conflict in families when I consume one stream of information and my parents consume the other one. So that's really a big problem in my family, because I study there and I have learned here that I should consume information from different sources. Well, newspapers, I prefer online editions, well, such as the Ukrainian Week, for example, and online editions of newspapers, magazines, maybe Twitter accounts of Ukrainska Pravda, for example. I don't like watching TV. Well, despite the fact that my father is good at politics, he is interested in this area of our social life, so he watches TV too much, and it is really bad news, because watching TV too much nowadays, it shows, I don't know how to express my thoughts, but it shows that he's a little bit separated from real situation in our country or in foreign politics, for example. So I agree with you that it is really hard, sometimes it's really hard to explain him that it's wrong opinion. And it's hard to explain him that the situation shown in TV news, TV episodes, I don't know, or TV shows like Shufrich Life, or how it's Schuster Life, yeah. It's a kind of, I'm sorry for my French, but it's a kind of rubbish. And I agree that it is really a big problem nowadays, but they are trying to join us, and they are trying to read read online editions of modern newspapers, not Echo Moskvy or Vesti or some kind of that stuff, you know. So thank you for attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I also want to say that both Beata and I, we actually understand Ukrainian pretty well. I think you can probably speak better than I do, but I also speak Russian. So also, if you are not completely comfortable speaking in English, feel free to present your ideas in Ukrainian, and I think we will be able to understand. I will follow this topic as well. My mother is 76 now, and she follows internet media, but particularly when it comes to the sources of information, they are dubious sources of information that she is using. Quite often she receives emails, and probably some of those are trolls, you know, that generate, you know, some, I will say it very openly, pro-Russian positions. I mean that in my country, I mean, the mainstream media take more the European position, but when it comes to this phenomenon of propaganda, of trolling, this is really done by internet, and so she quite often uses this type of information. And then, of course, when we see each other, usually every Sunday for lunch, sometimes we have disputes, and then I try to tell her, but you should use some respected sources of information. I mean, at the minimum, if you want to form some independent judgment, and often she's not happy with this, but then I ask her, where do you know this information from? And she can't say, you know. know. So I wonder, how is it in your experience? I mean, and we don't have to speak only about our parents, but when you read information from social media, because quite often Facebook and Twitter only disseminate information. They don't, they don't always come as a source. But do you look at the sources particularly before you share something? I mean, or you share because it's your friend who sent it to you and you trust your friends, or how is it in this respect? Anyone wants to share? I think you look like you have something to share now.
We all choose what believe in, and it's like philosophy. And that is why we create our point of view, and we try to join other people, our friends, and we retweet also, of course.
Well, I know that there is a kind of golden rule of journalists to trust not less than 3 sources. Well, if I have seen the information in 3 sources, well, I can trust it because it's checked. So it's not wrong. And of course, it's wrong position to trust only one tweet of the official resource. So. Of course, we check information before we share it with our friends or with our colleagues. So,
right.
But can I ask how many people have had the experience, and this is something which I've noticed quite a lot of late, that you're sitting around, you're going through your Facebook page, you have, X number of friends, they're posting all kinds of stories, and very often they're stories from credible sources, and I know that if it's from The Guardian or The Telegraph or, you can probably be relatively safe in knowing that it's accurate. But every so often a story pops up, and it has, very flashy headlines, and I think, wow, that's really exciting, but I don't recognize the source. And, when you start reading the article, you start thinking, there's something not quite right about this. And how many people have had that experience? And what do you do in that kind of a situation? Do you just forget about it and go on to other sources? Do you bother to go looking further to check whether that's really true, whether there's other information sources that are providing that information? How do you react to that kind of an environment?
Hello, my name is Margot, and I want to say that though in our Ukrainian internet there's a lot of sources that share not untrue, but the information that you can trust. From my experience, I can say that completely funny information, I just forget about it. It's funny to think that it could be true. But if I just think that it's something wrong with this, I may retweet it and just add my comment, or to look from the other media to see the same information about this, to look for more.
And would you actually put in a comment of your own that, this is interesting, but I'm not sure it's true, or, this is interesting, but you might want to check it further? Would you go that far, or would you just check yourself?
I want to say that if it's interesting, but it seems untrue, but it seems interesting, I just I won't forget it because it seems the different position. Maybe it's untrue, but it's different position, and we should accept all the minds, even if it's, as we can say, the position of our enemy. So it's really important to think how your enemy, to know how your enemy think. I think that we know we should to look for more possibilities to find more information and to form our own view on this news and to share our view with the others, with our friends or parents, because maybe they can add something new and important and different point of view.
And how many of you have the experience that, in your own media profile or in your own media sphere, as you're reading, you begin to get the feeling that pretty much everyone that you know is posting similar types of information. So, you read something and you're like, yeah, that's right, that's right, that's right. But you never come across information where you think, oh, that's different than what I think. Do people experience that more and more? Raise of hands, yes, no, yes? Or not really? No, and then also the question of that, phenomenon of the echo chamber and whether people find that their experiences are just being re-echoed amongst their colleagues or whether there are significant information pieces that challenge your point of view.
Because this is one thing that this new media brought, which is basically that on one hand there are no boundaries anymore. I mean, anyone from us can be a journalist now. I mean, we can just take our mobile phones, go outside, something happens, and so we take pictures and we take videos and we can report to the audience, and we can generate within a few seconds. I mean, your picture can become viral, and so you can, in a way, influence many people around the world, just simply because you are at the right time, at the right spot, and you sort of decide to share this information. But I think what Beata was sort of hinting at, or the reason why she was asking you this question, is that some people actually believe that to some extent social media also kill the real debate. That instead of, for example, some of you being engaged with us, you are in your mobile phone, somewhere else, with maybe with your friends who agree with you, with what you say, but we don't go out of these information bubbles and we don't really engage in a real discussion. What's your experience? I mean, are you participating in any discussions, for example? There are various Facebook groups, and it doesn't have to be about politics. It can be about some other issues, I mean, which are more common, I think, maybe in your age. But do you feel that, that there is not proper discussion? I mean, once you are engaged with Facebook or Twitter is probably not so popular here, yeah, in Ukraine. Is it or it's not? It is popular, yeah? But Facebook is probably more popular. Or not necessarily?
And do you think the level of information, do you think that the level of information that you get from Twitter is different? Do you notice a difference between what you get in Twitter and what you get on Facebook? What would you say the difference is? No? Go ahead.
Well, the difference between Twitter and news from Twitter and news from Facebook, well, in Twitter we have a short title And if you are interested in this, well, it's a kind of, well, a pregnant woman was killed in the center of Kyiv. And if you're interested in this kind of news, you just click the link in the post and you read the whole article. But in Facebook, it is a whole article at once, and you just, well, if you don't want to read some kind of news, you just scroll it down in Twitter. And for me, personally, it is more comfortable because I usually read news in subway or in bus, for example, or in car, and I just don't have time to read the whole article like on Facebook. So personally, for me, Twitter is more comfortable, more, and I would say, I would rather say that Twitter is more popular than Facebook here, but we have a quite good law from our president that Russian social networks are forbidden here, well, and a kind of very comfortable source like vk.com, it is forbidden, and Facebook, it is coming more and more popular, well, day after day, but personally for me, Twitter is much better for reading news, from sharing your opinion, because you have a limited quantity of symbols, well, 140 if I'm not mistaken, in Twitter. So you just have to, you don't have to write a quite good essay. Well, if you want to share your opinion with people, you just have 140 symbols and it's quite enough, I think. And personally for me, well, I advise Twitter for people who are not registered in this social network to join the community of Twitter, because it's really good.
Can I also ask, how many of you access information on the social media from outside of the country, either from surrounding countries or internationally, foreign language sources? A show of hands, how many people get other information sources from outside of Ukraine? Mm-hmm. And do you notice a difference in the quality of the information or the depth of information that comes from other places? Is it better? Is it worse? Are there things that can be learned in Ukraine? Are there bad practices that you see that shouldn't be repeated here?
I think you can just keep the microphone over there.
Personally, I read The Economist and the Daily Telegraph. So what I really like that it's written, you know, like the clever people have wrote this. But sometimes if we look at our newspapers and our online newspapers or something like that, it looks like the people who hadn't checked the information just shared their opinion with other people, and sometimes you can see later on Facebook some politicians that they are arguing with this newspaper because they are shared the wrong information. So and also what I really like about the international media, that they also use the views of some economists, some politicians, some the people who are really professional in this theme. But you know, in the Ukrainian media, it's rarely to see views of people like that.
Mm-hmm. And what about the bloggers? I mean, do you have some bloggers, I mean, that you really like and you consider them to be a good source for whatever type of information? Again, I mean, it can be very wide. I mean, just for shopping, for example, or for anything. I mean, music, yeah? I mean, probably most of you like music. Is there any blogger who writes good posts on? No? No good bloggers? No. Here?
There's a niche.
There is a niche, yes. Any of you, by the way, any of you writes blogs? No time. Too much to study, yeah? Excellent. I mean, just maybe briefly to comment on this issue of Twitter and Facebook. I think generally Twitter is considered to be a little bit more serious as for journalists as a source. I mean, now most of the politicians, I mean, including the President of the United States, has a Twitter account, with the exception of the fact that some politicians, such as Mr. Trump, or for that matter, I recently observed the Dutch elections. So I was for 3 weeks in the Netherlands, and there is a Dutch Trump called Wilders, who similarly tries to avoid the usual media filter just by going directly to Twitter and tweeting. So generally, I think even journalists now are more likely, even serious journalists like from The Economist or from The Guardian, they are more likely to look at the Twitter than Facebook because they can probably easily identify some interesting news, and also because of, as you rightly pointed out, it's very short. You know, it's 140 characters, and it's not that easy to express yourself. You know, I have a Twitter account, and sometimes I'm struggling, you know, to limit myself to this one sentence usually. You know, so I think on one hand it's a good thing, you know, that we are forced to formulate ourselves clearly and using fewer words, which usually good, not only journalists, I think I would argue that good writers are economic with the words, and they can say, you know, what they want to say, rather than talking about, you know, 30 pages describing one thing. Yeah. So Twitter, okay. I thought that it's Facebook, which is really more popular here.
Because VK is forbidden now. So, but Twitter, it has been popular for years. As far as I know, I'm a user of Twitter since April of 2020. 12. Well, 12. Yeah, 12. 2012. I'm sorry. And I joined Facebook only in 2015. Well, a political situation in our country has become not really stabilized, and I just decided to read more foreign sources of information. So that's the only reason I joined Facebook. But Twitter has been popular for a really long time. So Facebook is only on the first step of becoming the most popular social network in Ukraine, but it actually is not the one of the. It actually is not the most popular now.
Okay.
It is Twitter, still Twitter.
Well, we saw some numbers today. We participated at a different event at the conference, and we actually saw that some of those social networks which were recently banned, they were quite popular. Did any of you have your accounts, I mean, on some of these social networks? Yeah. And how do you feel now? I mean, will you try to bypass these, or will you just close your account and start on something else? Yeah.
Are you really understand Russian?
Да. Без проблем. Без проблем, да.
Okay. Запрет ВКонтакте.
The ban on VKontakte and other Russian social networks is not a barrier for the user to stop using it. They can always bypass it by changing their IP address and make believe that they are somewhere in the Netherlands while they will be in Ukraine. So that step was quite risky, because I think that limits the horizons of the people. They cannot use alternatives to the Western social networks, and this will not have a positive effect for our population. Now, as to the possibility to bypass or implement the ban, it was also quite stupid to adopt a law when you cannot really enforce it. Thank you. Well, basically, if I understood you well, so even one day after that decree, we already had in many internet sites advice about how to preserve one's accounts. And I also had my questions about that, because on the one hand I can understand that it's also an issue of security, and they have their own very serious arguments about why they thought they needed to do it, but the enforcement, the implementation of that law, when I first read it, I had many questions about how would that happen. Maybe you have heard. Is that okay when we speak Russian? You may have heard that in Germany they have also drafted such a law, suggesting that they have to take care of those fake news. And I also have questions about that. How are they going to do that? I understand that they would mostly focus on the local providers, but how can one do that? When we talk about Twitter or Facebook, when we're saying that these are no longer local media, but global ones. Well, there are many questions about that, of course. Can I ask you, what do you think? Is that better to talk about all those different items of information, or to cut it short so that you would get your information from just one source? To have more information, even if this information does not coincide with your opinion, or to cut it down so it would only reflect what you believe in?
Или на русском говорить, как удобно. It's better to have different information from different points of view, because if you have different points of view, you can analyze that information and objectively see the situation. If you know just one position, you believe on it, and maybe that is fake news. Yes.
Very good.
If we talk about to take more news about some information, as for me, if we talk about Twitter, also I want to say that like a general user, I like to use Twitter just for searching some proofs, to searching some information, especially from the viewers of some situation, of some events. So I just can click on the hashtag and see a lot of views, a lot of mentions of different people about some events. And Twitter I like to use because we have only, as we say, a short information, some words, and we can say really different mentions, really different thoughts, and in our country, in our world, every person could express their their thoughts. And if I check it, if I just read it, I can for myself understand what is equal with my mention and what is wrong. So I see lots of mentions, but I can filter it and take only that's useful for me.
Excellent. I think there was, yeah.
As for me, it was, I know everyone, that it was a really big problem for us that Vkontakte is not working anymore, because it's not even question of who is the owner of social media, but it's social media was comfortable for us, and we get used for it. But now I may say that I'm really happy because in Vkontakte there are a lot of children who also create their and express their political thoughts, thoughts about politics, yes, and they share it, yes, and it's just unacceptable for me. And in Facebook now less children. And I have a friend who live in Crimea, and when she knew about this law, yes, law, and that Facebook now, and that Vkontakte now is not forbidden in Ukraine, she was just preoccupied. She was very angry and sad. And I create Skype and sent that I now in Skype. And she was really sad, and she was just, she don't understand how can I live without Vkontakte. And I understand this thought because she is just live in her small world, right, and can't understand how she can live without it. Yes, she is like in cave for me, and she just angry.
Any other experiences, any other friends of yours who were not happy with this, or maybe on the other side? I mean, some ideas maybe to support, I mean, the ban?
Yes, I also wanted to say about Vkontakte. I think that it is a very strange and bad news because, as we know, also in Russia some websites are banned. And our politicians said that, look, in Russia they banned sites, they are dictator politicians, and now our politicians limited our freedom to visit some websites. This is very strange for me.
I mean, yes, please.
Well, I want to talk why I don't understand this presidential law. Firstly, there are a lot of people that are not connected to politics anyway, but they're registered in these social networks, so they don't connect it. But they were blocked. There is no logic there anyway. And the second reason is all the world is politicized. And networks also. And so we must block all networks because they're connected with politics, because politics is everywhere. So, but there are only there are only few countries in the world that don't have internet at all, except the government. And I don't want my country to be in the list of these countries because we're just a normal country, of course with such problems and etc. But I think this aspect wouldn't be in our country. I don't want such in our country. Yes.
I mean, I have to tell you that I also agree. I mean, for me, whenever I see attempts to close down a media outlet, to ban journalists, to kick them out from the country, there have to be very good reasons, you know, I mean, for doing this. You know, I'm not saying that sometimes the reasons could be justified, yeah? I mean, someone can really be, you know, maybe not journalist. I mean, someone can really exploit situations and maybe some media outlets are really spreading hatred or, you know, calling for violent things, you know. So in that case, and particularly if it's done repeatedly, you know, and there is no vision that they would improve or that they would accept that this is wrong, I think in that case I would take the harsh measures. But I would agree with you that, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm supporting rather to have more information and then to choose, as many of you said, you know, I prefer to read more. And this is exactly the type of period that we live in, you know, that it's not like it was in the past when we had very little information, you know, where we could not really get information. Now it's coming from everywhere, you know. You open your fridge and, you know, information jumps out of all possible tools, you know, mobile phone, television, you know, your computer. So we are targeted in a way, but I think I prefer it this way rather than, you know, banning and closing down. But again, I mean, of course, if we are sure, but we have to be sure that someone is violating the law, that someone is really, you know, has not very good purposes. I mean, then I think, you know, but we have to be careful, I think.
Maybe one last question from my side, and unfortunately we'll have to wrap up in a little bit, but in the news that you read online, how many of you read the commentary and how many of you participate in that commentary? Do you often comment? Do you think it's useful, or do you think it's just noise?
Okay, I speak Russian.
Но как по мне, то
I think that commenting political topics is something that I do not do, because proving something on the internet to someone with regards to politics makes no sense, because everybody is, so to say, an expert in politics, and therefore nobody will even look at your opinion, even if you prove it, even if you provide some rationale. But it seems to me that if a person has some standing on the internet, you'll fail at convincing them. And as a rule, comments are about something political on Facebook too. And neither I or my friends probably comment or engage into some kind of discussion. Russian or English? Or Ukrainian? I agree with Ola. Comments make no sense. Writing comments make no sense. It's much easier to post something on your page, specifically something targeted if you really care about something. And I know a lot of guys post their opinions about VK ban on their pages. If people are interested in the topic, they will read the post. And your opinion in the comments is something that people by default do not like it. And even, say, couch political scientists that say graduated Harvard, Oxford, and so on. It's only them who'll engaged in a discussion, not because to prove something to you, but to troll you. This is a really widespread phenomenon here. And I believe commenting something, especially if the public group is big, VK had lots of public groups of this kind, public communities. I can say that for Facebook because I mostly use Twitter, but in VK that was, pardon my French, a garbage pit with comments from people who were trolling each other, and I believe it makes no sense to comment because anyways your opinion will be regarded not in the way you wanted it to be perceived. One more lady, and then maybe I'll surprise someone, maybe not. But the thing is that I'm the person who likes to read the comments, and I really feel bad when I see 0 comments under a piece of news that I'm interested in, because this is yet another opportunity to read about other people's opinion, to learn about something additional that maybe wasn't covered in the piece, and I filter information that I see in the comments. But I believe that, well, Mira was saying that you can post something on your wall, but I don't think some will go to your wall because you have 50 followers, not more. But if you have an opinion, something that was left out in the piece, you can actually comment about that. I agree that when people are trying to prove the point in the comments, they won't be able to convince others because the comments are for expressing themselves rather for having their opinion changed. But this is another opportunity to express yourself and freedom of expression. I believe that's great.
To continue the discussion because I think it's an interesting one. So thank you very much all for coming today. Дуже вам дякую. Спасибо вам большое, and I hope to see you again someday in Kyiv.
And we have a few more minutes because I can see that there are people who wanted to take the floor. So I'll be moderating now. Could you please give them the mic? I'll use Russian. I had something to add to what Miroslava said about trolls in the comments. Yeah, I agree that in the comments people would fight about something political, and these people are, say, couch experts, something that they have to do to prove their worth. And I've seen situations when there are 2 people fighting in the comments, each of them had their fair share of fake news that they watch, and they are trying whose fake news is more has more truth in it, and you're just sitting and observing it unravel. And there was this opinion that the comments cover something that is not actually right. And when you see that people are saying that these are fake news, does it happen that people are trying to show it's fake, to go for self-verification. Well, that depends. Sometimes the arguments are really interested with proper reasoning, and sometimes they're just two schoolboys under fake names, and each of them is trying to prove their point and prove another one fake news, but that just makes no sense. And I saw some more people who wanted to speak. I have something to say about the comments. A few times I tried to comment on Европейская правда, to express my opinion. And on the situation with trolls, Russian trolls immediately appeared with a dissenting point of view, and they point blank started pouring dirt on my responding to my comment. So it's better to express something on Facebook, and it's better not to go for comments, because otherwise you just kill your mood. About trolls. Does that happen in discussions, or maybe there are specific websites with a specific type of discussion where normally trolls appear? Well, there are 4, and people have threads there, and they get engaged in discussions. And in the VK, you could just engage in discussion under a post, and in a public group, you would read and post a commentary. The difference between VK and Facebook is the interesting thing is that, say, analysts and experts, they would respond to commentaries to the post on their page. So if you want to hear their opinion, you can actually use it, unlike VK, where they have school children responding using swear words to your comments. And on Facebook, the experts, sometimes they don't have enough time to respond. And if you are following Macron or other prominent figures, there's no way knowing that they will respond to your commentary. I would like to give you an example from my country. Talking about the system and the way the websites operate, we have to be mindful that this disinformation flows through the internet. And yeah, we do have a TV station that has some dubious unknown sources of funds, but as far as internet is concerned, one of my friends tried keeping tabs on the websites. That wasn't something related to Russia, and the politics wasn't covered much there. It wasn't covered directly, but for example, there were articles.
You can cure cancer with a baking soda, yeah, or homeopathy. Значи такие, на которые, конечно, люди очень.
And people were greatly interested in that. They would click on that piece, and interestingly, the money for those money, that wasn't money from Russia. That was advertising money. And what my friend did, he set up ethics council, comprising of the people he knew, and he approached the companies that placed their ads there. He reached out to Toyota company and he asked, do you want your logo to be supporting, to be on that article, or near some conspiracy theories? And the thing is, there are around 100 websites in the list where their ads just don't appear. That's a group of the most powerful companies, and they said, we do not accept, we do not support those websites that get those articles out of thin air.
No real grounds to believe that some of these articles are based on real facts. And so what they achieved, to što oni uspeli сделать, to što
And what they achieved is that they lost lots of money. Some of them are still popular, but there's not that much support in terms of how much advertising they get. That's important. The project is called conspiratory.sk. And there were lots of conspiracy ideas. And that is also important to understand how those websites work. I have a question, just diverting from VK and Facebook. You specialize in media and elections. I'm personally really concerned with the problem that young people in Ukraine, aged younger than 25, they don't normally vote. So how can we engage them with the help of media, not to make them, but just to go and put a tick in the ballot, not just picking someone, but just go there, because those who come to vote, as the rule, they're not on the internet, they watch TV, and this is how they form their opinion. And the students who, in my opinion, are capable of critical thinking and focus on various opinions, they just won't go voting.
That's a very good question. Let me tell you a short story, and that's the reason why I'm here today and why I started working in this area. Back in 1998, we had a very important election campaign in my country. At that time, the most important issue for us was whether Slovakia would take a more pro-Russian road, if I can put it that way, and that we would have no democracy, but more of an autocratic system, or whether, like our neighboring countries, Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. At that time, I wanted to do something very much about the elections. It was not so much a question of how I would vote, but I wanted to do something more than just vote, and it was important for me. At that time, I had several proposals. I could either get a normal job on contract, but that would be, you know, a business job. I had that chance, or to work for only several months, but during an election campaign. I was young at that time, as you can see. That was my previous life. And at that time, I chose what I chose to do something. at the election campaign because I thought it was important to do something for my country. We had many volunteers in our organization. We started monitoring the media. One reason was that at that time the former Prime Minister used our media, including public broadcasting, like Kuchma did it in Ukraine, or like Yanukovych used the media. And we, the students, we wanted to do something to have good conditions, normal conditions. Well, of course, we were thinking about our own life at that time. Now I think more about my children's life. My father was a writer who wrote, things about what happened in my country in 1968 when the Russian tanks had come. And when I saw what was happening, what the Russian media wrote in 2014 about what was happening here, I realized that that was very dangerous. And that it was dangerous not only for Ukraine or Georgia, but for all of the world. And from that point of view, I think that what is important is for all of us to understand it, not only here in Ukraine, but all over Europe and in the world, that this is dangerous. So how can one mobilize people? I think that the internet is one of such possibilities. It's just important that the young people can understand that this is a unique opportunity for them, which they don't have in some other countries. Look at that large country. There, nothing changes election after election. And I think this is important. When I look at my own country, I see that people forget very quickly what we had in 1998, or even before that, 1989, when the first significant changes had started. At that time, we respected that very much, really. I was a student, I participated in those actions of protest. But when I speak to these people now, people have forgotten many of those things very quickly. So we have to talk about them. We have to keep reminding them that that's our very important right. Maybe you think that what you do has no influence, but I think it has it. And that's the biggest difference between Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and those other countries of the former Soviet Union, where nothing is changing, election after election. We have to talk about that. We have, for all of you to understand that you have this possibility, and there is no better system. I'm not saying democracy is the best system, but there is nothing better than that, as Churchill once said. Thank you. Dear students, I want to thank you very much for your attention. Thank the speakers for having this short lecture and then this question and answer session with you. I very much hope that it will give food for thought for all of us. It's true that the freedom of speech is one of our most fundamental rights that we are still lucky to enjoy. I think that many of you will be able to watch the pictures on IFES Facebook page. Tomorrow, right? They will be published there. Oh, even tonight you will be able to see them online. So please visit our page.